What is one true crime case that you just can't stop thinking about? I always wonder what really happened to 6-year-old Catherine Cedillos. On August 7th, 1996, Catherine, along with her mom Nancy and her brother Chris, were out running errands. Catherine's dad was Paul Cedillos, who at the time was the tour manager for Jon Bon Jovi. That day was Paul's birthday, so they were all out looking for a present for him. They all lived on Elder Circle, which is a small neighborhood near Austin, Texas. When they got back to Elder Circle, Catherine wanted to pick up the mail from the community mailbox and then walk home. The mailboxes were only about 1/8 of a mile from their home, and Catherine had done this a few times before, so her mom let her. Catherine would take the shorter route home, while her mom and brother would take the longer route around Elder Circle. This way, they would be getting home at almost the same time. But once Nancy and Chris got home with still no sign of Catherine, Nancy sent Chris to go and look for her. But when Chris couldn't find her, Nancy started searching for her by car. Within minutes, they found her laying in the middle of the road on Elder Circle. She was unconscious but still breathing. According to Nancy, she didn't want to make her daughter lay on the hot pavement, so she picked her up and took her to the hospital. Little Catherine suffered from a fractured skull and never regained consciousness, and sadly, she died later that day. Authorities initially thought that Catherine was a victim of a hit and run, but certain things didn't add up. Where Catherine's body was found was in an unusual spot. Her mom last saw her walking towards their house, but her body was found a little over a mile away from their home in the opposite direction that she was supposed to have gone. Catherine's body was actually found along the route that her mom and brother took to get home, and the autopsy only deepened the mystery. The autopsy showed that Catherine didn't die from a hit and run. Along with her head injury, she also had abrasions on her left shoulder, lower back, right hip, and her knees. The ME found that Catherine had either jumped, fallen, or was thrown from a moving vehicle. One theory investigators came up with was that Catherine maybe tried to hold on to the back of her mom's car on the drive home, but fell off. This would explain the location of where her body was found. But her family did not believe this, so they hired a PI. The PI noted that it was a really hot summer day, and at the time, Catherine's left thumb was broken and in a splint, so it would have been really difficult for her to hold on to anything. And it's likely her mom would have seen her in the rearview mirror. Catherine's family believes she was abducted and murdered. After her death, investigators brought in a canine unit that tracked her scent to a vacant lot 30 yards from the mailboxes, but it was lost after that. This sparked a theory that Catherine was approached by an attacker at the mailboxes, ran into the lot, was caught and thrown into a car, struck in the head, and then was thrown out of the vehicle where she was found. Nancy also stated that it appeared her daughter's body was laid out for her to find. Her hair was smoothed down, her clothes were straight, and her sandals were still on. Unfortunately, there's never been any answers in this case, and it's still labeled a suspicious death. Jon Bon Jovi wrote a song dedicated to Catherine called August 7, 415. And sadly, in March of 2020, Catherine's brother Chris, who grew up to be a police officer, was tragically killed in a car accident.
A lot of people think I'm crazy for not going out on a cruise, but I just really don't like the idea of how anything can happen out on the open ocean. First of all, the ocean is a perfect place to hide a body. All you have to do is dump it. By the time the boat docks and authorities can get on board, so much time has passed and you can dispose of a lot of evidence. Also, water washes away evidence, so it's really hard to investigate. This is the case with Colleen Wood. In fall 2000, she set off on a long-term sailing trip with her boyfriend of 1.5 years, John Paul Sr. They both loved sailing. It was how they met actually, and she was looking forward to visiting different ports at different countries and getting some amazing Christmas presents for her grandkids. To her loved ones' concern, she sells all of her possessions on land, including like designer clothes and her condo, which she sells for $40,000. According to her, John Paul says that there's no point in paying for something that she's not even going to be using. She's last heard from in early December when she calls her son to tell him about the Christmas presents she got, and then when she calls her friend to say that she will be attending her Christmas party. However, Christmas and New Year's came and went, and there was no word from Colleen. Her increasingly concerned son calls her cell phone and finds out that it was shut off due to lack of payment. He also decides to Google his mom's boyfriend, and this is when he finds something bone-chilling. Just months before meeting Colleen, John Paul had just finished up serving time in prison for attempted murder. He was dealing drugs and his business partner ratted him out, and he decided to pay him back by shooting him. He also finds out that John Paul's ex-wife, Shalise Paul, is also a missing persons case. She was last seen when she drove down to Florida to reconcile with her ex-husband. After he docks in Florida, the police interrogate John Paul, and he says that he and Colleen broke up. He tells them several contrasting stories about how she left when he docked and she came back to get some of her stuff with a football player boyfriend. Police wanted to arrest John Paul, but this was just a disappearance and not a murder case, and there wasn't any evidence besides the fact that she was last seen with him. A few days later, they try to contact him again, and they find out that he sailed away on his boat, Island Girl, the day after the police interviewed him. Shortly before she went missing, Colleen's credit card was used to place an ad in the classified section of a newspaper looking for a sailing partner, and it was used again to place an ad in the man-seeking woman section. Even worse, $40,000 is withdrawn from her bank account in separate increments from different ATMs. The police tracked down the people who made these withdrawals, and it was two random young women who said a man came up to them on the street and gave them cash for getting this money out for him. To this day, the police haven't been able to locate the man who certainly killed Colleen. He's been spotted at different ports but never stays there for more than a few days.
Let's talk about Elizabeth Salgado and this penny that could be the key to solving her case. Elizabeth Elena Laguna Salgado was a 26-year-old girl from Chiapas, Mexico. Elizabeth was an honor student and a very active member of the LDS Church. After graduating from college, she told her family she wanted to move to the United States to learn English, get better opportunities, and also spread her Mormon faith. At the time, Elizabeth's mom, Libertad, had two brothers living in Provo, Utah. So she told Elizabeth, listen, go to Utah so at least you have some family nearby in case you need anything. So in March of 2015, Elizabeth got a student visa, enrolled herself at this school, and moved to these apartments in Provo, Utah. At first, she kind of struggled to make friends since she didn't really know English. However, once she joined the LDS Church in Utah, there was a lot of people there that spoke Spanish, so she quickly started to make new friends. Got really close to this guy named Mackie Smith, who said Elizabeth was really pretty, and anytime they would go out, she would always get hit on by every single guy, but that she would always say no because she wanted to focus on her faith and on her studies, and he says that Elizabeth was just a really kind and caring person. So then, on Thursday, April 16, 2015, Elizabeth finished school at around 1:30 p.m. and began the 30-minute walk back to her apartment. Since Elizabeth didn't have a car, she asked her Uncle Rudy if he could pick her up at 5 p.m. to take her to Walmart and get some groceries. As Elizabeth was walking home, one of her sisters texted her and asked her, "What are you doing?" Elizabeth replied and said, "I already left school," which her sister thought was really weird. Elizabeth was never that short with her text messages, so her sister thought it was weird and texted her again, but this time Elizabeth did not reply. The family thought it was a little weird that she hadn't replied, but they just assumed that her phone had died. So then 5 p.m. rolls around and Rudy shows up at Elizabeth's apartment to pick her up. He sends her a text message letting her know he's outside, but she doesn't reply. After a few minutes of waiting, he knocks on the apartment door but doesn't get a response. He just assumes that maybe Elizabeth walked to Walmart instead and didn't let him know, so then he heads over to Walmart to see if he can find her. So Rudy arrives to Walmart and goes through every single aisle looking for Elizabeth but doesn't see her. Now he's thinking that maybe Elizabeth got called into work and that's why she didn't show up. So then he drives over to the Mexican restaurant where Elizabeth works at and she's not there. He thought this was a little bit weird but figured maybe Elizabeth had made plans with someone else and forgot to tell him, so he decided to just go home. So the next morning, Elizabeth's family wakes up and they expect to find a lot of messages from Elizabeth saying, "Sorry, my phone died, that's why I didn't call you yesterday." However, when they woke up, they had no messages or calls from Elizabeth. Libertad is freaking out at this point and she calls her brother Rudy and tells him to go check on Elizabeth. So he goes over to Elizabeth's school to see if she's there, but she isn't. So then he goes over to Elizabeth's apartment and her roommates answer the door. They tell Rudy that they haven't seen Elizabeth since yesterday morning, which means that after Elizabeth left school and started walking home, she never made it to her apartment. Then they call Elizabeth's job and they tell them that Elizabeth never showed up for her shift. That's when the family decided to call the police department and report Elizabeth as missing. A couple of students say that they did see her on her walk back to her apartment, but then she just vanished. Okay, part 2 is up now. Okay, this is part 2 on what happened to 26-year-old Elizabeth Salgado. So detectives decide to recreate the route Elizabeth would take from school to her apartment, and as they're walking along the route, they notice that this is a very busy street, so if she was abducted, someone would have seen it. Also checked if there were any cameras along the route, but there weren't. Word of Elizabeth's disappearance spread all over Utah and even reached Elizabeth Smart. If you're not familiar with Elizabeth Smart, I recommend you look up her story because she's very inspirational. But her and her family decided to help Elizabeth Salgado's family and help search for her and raise money, and they truly thought that they would find Elizabeth alive. Elizabeth's family was able to fly from Chiapas to Utah to help in the search, and everyone was looking everywhere, but there was just no sign of Elizabeth. Police were getting very frustrated with the case because they didn't even know where to begin looking. They had no crime scene, they didn't know the exact spot where Elizabeth vanished. I mean, they literally had nothing. This is when police began to theorize that maybe the uncles had something to do with it. They did conduct a polygraph test on Rudy and he passed. However, Elizabeth's other uncle named Rosenberg failed his. However, when police began to investigate him more, they found out he had a clear alibi for the day Elizabeth disappeared. However, when people heard that he had failed the polygraph test, a lot of people stopped helping the family and didn't want to search for Elizabeth anymore. Even though the uncle was cleared, a lot of people stopped supporting the family. So then 3 years go by since Elizabeth disappeared and there's still nothing. It wasn't until Friday, May 18th of 2018, a.m., police receive a call from a man saying he discovered human remains while hiking at Hobble Creek Canyon. He was searching for a spot to set up camp and he ended up finding a hollow grave, and that's where the human remains were. The medical examiner confirms that this is in fact 26-year-old Elizabeth Salgado. She was found only 15 miles away from where she was last seen. It's so crazy that it took 3 years for someone to find her remains. However, because of the state of her body, the medical examiner was not able to determine a cause of death. So in 2019, the family decided to hire a private investigator named Jason Jensen. He's part of the Utah Cold Case Coalition, and he decided to go to the spot where Elizabeth's body was found to further investigate. While he was searching the area, his metal detector went off. Under some leaves, he found a 2006 penny. Upon further investigation of the penny, they ended up finding male DNA. So now Jason and the family want to find whosever DNA this matched to, because even if they aren't the killer, they still have to explain how they dropped their penny at a spot where human remains were for the last 3 years. Since Jason works for a nonprofit, they currently don't have enough resources to do more testing and create a more extensive DNA profile from the penny. I do have a GoFundMe to raise money for this DNA testing, and when I posted my YouTube video, it was at $300 and now it's at $4,600. So thank you to everyone that donated. We're so close to hitting the $5,000. To this day, Elizabeth's killer has never been caught. Some people believe it was someone she most likely knew and offered her a ride home. That's why no one heard or saw someone getting abducted, because she went willingly. I really hope that the police continue their investigation until her killer is finally caught. Rest in peace, Elizabeth, and I hope you have some justice soon. Let's talk about what happened to 30-year-old Yanira Cedillos. Yanira is a mother of 3 from Moses Lake, Washington. She was the third daughter of a family of 5 girls, and she was extremely close to her siblings. Her sister Lanny says that there was never a dull moment with Yanira. She was a beautiful woman, and everywhere she went, everyone knew her. So Yanira dated this 27-year-old man named Juan Gastelum, also known as Johnny Trujillo. They dated for a little over a year, but their relationship was not good. He was very controlling and abusive towards Yanira, and according to a post on Facebook, she had 2 domestic cases against him. He eventually hit her breaking point and broke things off with Johnny, which he did not take very well. He couldn't handle the fact that Yanira was finally moving on, so he would call and text her hundreds of times and wouldn't leave her alone. He started to have the mentality of, if I can't have her, no one can. On Thursday, March 3rd, 2022, Yanira celebrated her 30th birthday with some friends. They went out to the Papa's Casino in Moses Lake, Washington, and the night started out great. However, the mood would quickly change when Yanira started to receive hundreds of messages, calls, and Snapchats from her ex Johnny. He asked her what she was doing, who she was with, and he supposedly wanted to surprise her for her 30th birthday. At around midnight, some type of argument ensued between Yanira and her friends, and she left the group. She ended up calling a friend to see if he could come pick her up, and he said yes. A short time later, this friend arrives to pick up Yanira, but she's not there. He called Yanira to let her know he had arrived, and he says that in the background of the call, he heard a man yelling at Yanira and asking, "Who are you calling?" Then the phone call disconnected. A few moments later, this friend gets a call from Yanira letting him know that everything is okay and that she no longer needs a ride home. The next morning, on Friday, March 4th, Yanira never made it to work. Her family immediately knew something was wrong, so they called the Moses Lake Police Department and reported Yanira as missing. Officers arrived to the Huron Creek apartments where Yanira lived, and as soon as they entered her unit, they knew something bad had happened. Police determined that on the night of her birthday, Johnny picked up Yanira and took her back to her apartment. Then, he killed Yanira and moved her body post-mortem. Yanira's body has not been found, but police say that Johnny took photos of everything he did to Yanira, and that's how they know she's deceased. On March 9th, Johnny was arrested in Oregon and was supposed to be extradited back to Washington, but the process has been delayed. At this time, the family is asking for the public's help in finding Yanira. They made this Instagram page called Justice for Yanira, where they post updates about the case and let people know if any search parties are going on. If you would like to support Yanira's family and her 3 kids, there is a GoFundMe page open. All the family wants is to find Yanira and give her a proper burial so the kids and the family have a place to go visit her. Yanira's family decided to share her story with the world in hopes of showing the importance of seeking help and counseling right away and recognizing the signs of abuse. The family is asking for the public to keep an eye out for Yanira, especially in the Moses Lake and Oregon area. I hope Yanira is found soon. Let's talk about what happened to 13-year-old Laura Ayala. Laura was born on October 29, 1988. She's described as being a very shy and reserved young girl, but she was also very organized and did very well in school. She was an honor student and was a part of the chess club, writing club, garden club, and she always got A+ on everything, and she took school very seriously. On Sunday, March 10, 2002, Laura asked her mom if she could borrow some money to walk to the store nearby. She needed to buy some newspaper for a project that wasn't even due tomorrow, but she really wanted to get it done tonight. Her mother, Angelica, said, "No, it's 10 p.m., you're not walking to the store by yourself," but Laura insisted that she really wanted to finish this project tonight. Despite her mother telling her no, Laura left the apartment complex at around 10:15 p.m. She walked to the Broadway convenience store that was located inside the Conoco gas station that was literally less than 100 feet from her apartment. It was literally only a 2-minute walk. Around 5 to 10 minutes after Laura left, her mother, Angelica, realizes that she was gone. She started to get worried because it's only a 2-minute walk, so why was Laura gone for so long? She decides to walk to the store, and when she gets inside, Laura is nowhere to be found. Angelica asked the employees if they saw a little girl come in and buy some newspaper, and they say yes. They said that a girl matching Laura's description came inside, bought the newspaper, and then quickly left alone. She starts to look around, and she ends up finding Laura's sandals and the newspaper she bought scattered in this parking lot between the gas station and the apartment. Angelica immediately began to scream and panic, and she called the police department and reported Laura as missing. Since Laura's belongings were found scattered, police believe that she may have been abducted. The convenience store didn't have any cameras, so they weren't able to see if maybe someone approached Laura or if maybe someone followed after her. People in the community were very supportive towards Laura's family, and they were out there helping the police and searching for Laura. A witness comes forward and says that they saw a full-size, mid-1980s maroon cargo van near the convenience store at the time of Laura's disappearance. A neighbor comes forward and says that they also saw the same van parked in the parking lot where Laura's belongings were found. They said the sliding door was open and that either a Hispanic or Caucasian male was standing near the van. Since it's believed to be a work van, police were able to track down a man named Martin Marmolejo. Martin worked as a plumber at the gas station, and the night that Laura disappeared, Martin and his partner were actually there working, but his partner left and Martin stayed there alone until 10 p.m. His van does match the description of the van seen at the time Laura disappeared, and police have questioned him, but they believe he's more of a witness than a suspect in the abduction. So police continue with the investigation, and they start to follow a new theory that maybe Laura was put on a bus and taken to Reynosa, Mexico. A bus driver from the El Expreso bus company told police that a man and a woman boarded this bus with a young girl fitting Laura's description. When he checked the passenger's log, this girl's name was Laura A. Okay, part 2 is up now. This is part 2 on what happened to 13-year-old Laura Ayala. So police were able to track down the couple that boarded this bus with the little girl, and they realized that when they arrived to Reynosa, Mexico, all 3 of them separated. So to this day, police have not been able to confirm this sighting, and they kind of think that this was a dead end. So then a few months go by since Laura's disappearance, and police have no leads, no suspects, and no idea as to what happened to Laura. Then, in August of 2002, police began investigating 3 men in connection with the murder of several women in East End, Texas. These 3 men are 25-year-old Walter Alexander Sorto, 24-year-old Rafael Cubas, and 16-year-old Eduardo Navarro. In February of 2003, the 3 of them were arrested for the R-word and murder of several women. Edgardo and Walter were sentenced to death, while Navarro was only sentenced to 13 years since he was only the getaway driver and was only 16 years old. So the trio admitted that they would sometimes use Edgardo's father's car to use for these abductions. So police search the father's car, and they end up finding blood that doesn't belong to any of the known victims. These detectives are familiar with the case of Laura Ayala, so they call the Houston Police Department and they tell them, "Listen, you need to get a DNA sample from Laura's family ASAP because we might have found something." So they get the DNA sample and test it to the DNA found in the back of the van, and it comes back as a match. This blood found in the back of this van used by 3 men to abduct and murder young females belonged to 13-year-old Laura Ayala. The trio says that they had nothing to do with Laura's disappearance, and to this day, they deny everything. Since Laura's body has not been found and the only evidence they found in the van was Laura's blood, these 3 men have never been charged with her disappearance or murder. To this day, Edgardo and Walter are still on death row, and they continue to deny having anything to do with Laura's disappearance. Navarro already served his 13-year sentence in juvenile prison, and he's just out and about now. I'm sure if he did have something to do with Laura's disappearance, there's no way he's going to admit to that now because he's free. I truly hope that before these men are executed, they come forward and let Laura's family know what happened. Laura would be in her 30s now, and she had a full life ahead of her. It's really sad that all she was trying to do was buy some newspaper to complete a school project, and someone had to take her life from her. I know Angelica lives with a lot of regret, and she wishes she could have stopped Laura from leaving that night. The last update I saw is that Angelica still lives in that same apartment and that she hopes that Laura will come home soon. If you guys know anything about what happened to Laura, please contact the Houston Police Department. She needs to be found and properly laid to rest. All my thoughts and prayers go out to Laura's family, and I hope that she's found soon.
Last Meal Monday, where every Monday I tell you what a killer on death row had as their final meal. This week we're going to talk about Judy Buenoano. Judy grew up in an incredibly abusive household. By the time she was 14, she was sentenced to prison for attacking her father, stepmother, and 2 stepbrothers. Once released, she was placed in a reform school, and in 1971, at the age of 17, ended up getting pregnant and giving birth to her eldest son, Michael. In 1962, Judy ended up marrying James Goodyear and having 2 more children with him. They lived what appeared to be a pretty happy life until 1971, when James started getting really sick. By September of 1971, James had passed away, and the cause of death was listed as natural causes. The following year, in 1972, Judy met Bobby Harris, and they began a relationship. Ultimately, in 1977, she and her children ended up moving to Colorado to live with Bobby. And the next year, in 1978, Bobby started getting very sick, and ultimately, he ended up passing away. Again, the cause of death was listed as natural causes. After the death of Bobby, Judy and her kids moved back to Florida, and her eldest son, Michael, enlisted in the Army. Shortly after enlisting, though, he started getting sick, and he was hospitalized. And it was found that he was suffering from arsenic poisoning. And because of this poisoning, he ended up losing most of the feeling in his hands and his legs, and had to use braces to get around. Unfortunately, this did mean he was medically discharged from the Army. In 1980, Judy took both of her sons, James and Michael, canoeing when their canoe capsized. Judy and James were able to swim to shore, but unfortunately, because of Michael's braces, he was dragged down and he drowned. Not long after the death of her son, Judy began seeing a man by the name of John Gentry. They eventually got engaged, but in 1983, John was rushed to the hospital after his car exploded. Miraculously, John survived the explosion, and this is when police finally began looking into Judy. When the police searched John and Judy's home, they found vitamin pills that Judy had been giving to John, but when their lab investigated, they found that the pills were full of arsenic, and that's when they got a court order to exhume both of Judy's exes and her son Michael. Police discovered that all 3 men had signs of arsenic poisoning in their system, and that's when Judy was arrested. In 1984, she was convicted of the attempted murder of John Gentry and the murder of her son Michael, and in 1985 is when she was found guilty and convicted of the murders of Bobby and James, and that is also when she was sentenced to death. Judy was put to death on March 30th, 1998 in the electric chair. For her final meal, she had asparagus, broccoli, tomatoes, strawberries, and a cup of hot tea. And that brings us to the end of...
A woman just woke up from a 2-year coma and was finally able to identify her attacker. 51-year-old Wanda Palmer was found on her couch in June of 2020. She'd suffered severe injuries from what police believed was a hatchet or an axe. She was unconscious but still breathing, and luckily she survived. But Wanda was in a coma, so without her statements and enough evidence, no one could be charged. 2 years later, Wanda woke up and was finally able to identify her attacker, her brother, 55-year-old Daniel Palmer III. On Friday, he was arrested and charged with attempted murder and malicious wounding. His bail is $500,000.